I'm almost 30, but my life is just loneliness, locked away within 4 walls. I try not to talk to anyone, because I'm afraid of meeting the wrong people. I'm not talking about scammers or thieves, but about those who exist on the edge of reality. They can be terrifying right away, or they can pretend to be ordinary people for a long time, gaining your trust, proving to everyone around that they're even more normal than you are. But sooner or later, something gives them away. Pale skin suddenly turns blue, their face contorts, joints twist unnaturally. And these creatures are drawn to me on their own, as if they think I'm one of them. That's why I try not to make acquaintances, not to stand out, and live quietly as a loner. These people seem to be tied to places where something bad happened, a disaster, an accident, a painful death. In a big city, death is an everyday thing, so I run into them everywhere, literally every day. I call them the sufferers. I don't know what they really are. At first, I thought they were the souls of people who had died, but then I realized they're more like something that was born at the moment of dying. The sufferers are a kind of mocking, sneering embodiment of a terrible death, a caricature of human agony. I avoid places where I've ever encountered them, even just once. I constantly have to change my routes, making them longer and more inconvenient. I used to often walk through a certain underpass. Not all the lights worked there, cigarette butts were scattered around, parts of the walls were crumbling, and it always smelled like urine. But that route shortened my way home. That underpass was almost always empty, but from time to time a homeless man would take shelter there from the bad weather. He sat on a piece of cardboard, dirty and with a tangled beard. He wore a wholly checkered sweater and 2 jackets with broken zippers. On his head was a blue knitted hat with strings and a funny pom-pom, with greasy, unwashed strands of hair sticking out from underneath. This homeless man never missed a chance to ask for help. He always asked, "Got a smoke or any spare change?" And honestly, I was as poor as a church mouse myself, so the only difference between us was that I hadn't yet been evicted from my apartment for unpaid utility bills. I had nothing to share with this beggar. I think that before you can help others, you need to help yourself first, and even that wasn't going so well for me. One late autumn evening, I was walking through the underpass and noticed that this time the beggar wasn't sitting, but lying curled up on his piece of cardboard. He was shaking from coughing fits, falling silent, and then starting to cough again, choking on his own saliva and phlegm. Even though I always thought of myself as the last person in the world who could help someone, I still have a heart. So I took off my old woolen scarf and handed it to the beggar. "Thank you," he croaked, and, lifting himself up a little, tightly wrapped it around his neck. That night was freezing cold. Even at home, wrapped up in a blanket, I could feel the cold seeping under my skin. And in the morning, I had to go out again, hoping to get some money or at least some food. All my life, I've had to scrape by with odd jobs. I couldn't keep a steady job, so people wouldn't think I was crazy. I tried before to get on staff somewhere, but it always ended pretty much the same way. I'd make friends with my coworkers, and then it would turn out that some of them didn't even exist. Pretty soon, real people started treating me like some weirdo who talks to himself while staring at the wall. Clients were scared of me, and coworkers kept their distance. No matter where I was, everything always went sideways. So I decided I didn't want to go through the disappointment of getting fired again, and I'd be my own boss from then on. I don't have a degree, since going to university also meant having to interact with people. So I started picking up odd jobs wherever I could, barely scraping by. That day, I was really strapped for cash and ready to jump at any opportunity. That's why I was hurrying off my street, heading toward the city center. Overnight, the city had been dusted with hard snowflakes that looked like coarse salt. The wind cut through my hat and chilled my ears. I pulled my jacket collar up higher to shield my neck and walked my usual route toward the underpass. And as I went down the steps, I saw that beggar. He was lying on the floor in a puddle of his own frozen urine. His lips and eyelashes were covered with frost. His hands were tightly gripping his shoulders. The scarf I had given him hadn't saved him from that freezing night. It was still only early morning. I walked past, knowing that others would soon find the body. They know better than I do what to do in situations like this. In a big city, the death of one person means nothing. He's like a fallen hair, brushed out and thrown away. No one will notice the loss. I kept using that underpass for a long time after. Every day I walked past the spot where that beggar had died. I wanted to believe that his death was peaceful, not painful. Maybe he just fell asleep and never woke up. But one evening, as I went down, I saw the outline of a person at the other end of the tunnel. He was kneeling, his head bowed. Not suspecting anything, I walked toward him. I thought it was just another poor soul sheltering from the wind. But suddenly, he started to rise. As he did, his joints cracked like breaking ice. I stopped, immediately realizing who he was. The man turned his bearded face toward me and coughed. The sound was so loud that the walls shook, and in some places, the tiles crumbled. Each time, the cough grew louder. The noise made my ears ring. Teeth flew out of the frozen man's mouth as he ran at me, his eyes wide and frozen. Bloody spray burst from his black throat. His coughing shook the tunnel. I bolted backward and dashed out of the passage, never to go down there again. That path was now tainted by the sufferer. I had to find another way home. And things like this keep happening to me all the time. Damn sufferers. They've ruined my whole life. I was only 7 years old when I first met one of those creatures. As a kid, I made acquaintances easily, but for some reason, they never turned into real friendships. So sometimes I had to walk around by myself. I wandered around the outskirts of the city, picking up sticks and stones and making up solo games. One day, near the forest, I met a boy who insisted on being friends. He was no different from any other kid. Just a boy with a short haircut, a bright cartoon t-shirt, and athletic shorts. Freckles on his nose, and his eyes were light blue. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Tolia," I replied. "And I'm Genya." He reached out his hand as a sign of friendship. His palm was warm. We met a few times. Without making any plans, we would meet around the same forest and walk together. This Genya seemed like an interesting guy, though a bit odd. Out of the blue, he could suggest discussing gloomy topics. "Tolia, what do you think? If someone dies in a cemetery, is that funny?" he once asked, looking at me with curiosity. "No, it's not funny. Death is kind of not cheerful," I replied. "I think it's funny," Genya said, grinning widely. "Why?" I didn't understand. "Well, look, he died in the cemetery, right? And then they take him from there to the morgue, change his clothes, put him in a coffin, and bring him back to the cemetery. What's the point? They could have just buried him right away and not wasted any time, my friend explained. Yeah, I guess you're right, I agreed hastily, just wanting to close this grim topic. Back then, I didn't really think about things like that, since I hadn't really encountered death. Only once did my mom tell me that our elderly neighbor upstairs had died. They explained to me that our lives aren't forever. People grow old, and then they fall asleep forever. But cemeteries, coffins, dressing the dead, I knew nothing about any of that. All of it passed by my carefree childhood world. But Genya, it seemed, was really interested in this topic. Sometimes I started to notice that his head would twitch every now and then. He would just shake it from time to time, as if it were bouncing on a spring. It looked strange, but I tried not to pay attention. I thought it would be kind of rude to ask about things like that. One day, we were sitting on a rickety wooden bridge over a small stream, tossing pebbles into the water, trying to scare the minnows and tadpoles. "Where do you live?" I asked. "Not far from here, just beyond that forest," Genya replied, waving his hand toward the thick trees. "Do you have your own room at home?" I asked, counting how many stones I had left in my pocket. "Of course, a big room." "Why do you ask?" "Want to come over?" my friend asked. "I can invite you, but only if you go with your eyes closed." "Why's that?" I asked, surprised. "So you won't remember the way," Genya replied, without explaining the reason for such secrecy. But for some reason, it seemed to me that this would be a fun game. I promised not to open my eyes, and I kept my word. I walked with my eyes tightly shut, covering my eyelids with my hands, while Genya guided me, sometimes steadying me by the shoulder. We walked along one of the forest paths. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the gentle wind swaying the tree branches, the birds singing, and the insects buzzing. I heard my friend's voice and caught the sound of his footsteps behind me. And whenever he fell silent, I felt terribly uneasy, as if I were lost alone in this thicket. "Genya, are you still there?" I asked anxiously once again. "Yeah, I'm here. Careful, there's a bump ahead," the boy warned. And I carefully moved my feet. This went on for a long time, and I started to get tired of this game. I could feel how sore my feet were, how my eyelids ached from the strain, and how my stomach was starting to hurt, demanding its share of lunch. "That's it, we've arrived," Genya finally said. "But don't open your eyes just yet." I stopped. The boy walked ahead and noisily yanked on something metal. The hinges creaked. It could have been a gate or maybe an old door. Genya took me by the shoulder again. "Let's go. Just walk slowly. There's a staircase ahead." I felt that I was now in a dark, cold room. No more daylight filtered through my eyelids, and I caught the smell of dampness in my nose. I carefully made my way down the small steps, following my friend. Sand crunched under my feet. "Easy, easy. Walk slowly or you'll fall and break your neck," Genya said. And then he repeated it again. Right in my ear, "You'll fall and break your neck." His voice echoed off the walls. It sounded so creepy that I instantly lost trust in my companion and started wondering if I should have believed a guy I barely knew. And where had he brought me? What kind of house is this, where you have to go downstairs? The steps ended. I stepped onto a solid stone floor, still keeping my eyes closed, hearing only the ticking of a clock in that room. "This is my room," Genya said, standing behind me. I opened my eyes and saw horror. The faint light from the top of the stairs revealed a terrifying scene before me. There were only brick walls. No doors, no windows. On the floor lay 2 rotten, broken coffins with human bones sticking out of them. And that rhythmic sound turned out not to be the ticking of a clock at all. It was water dripping through the stone ceiling, forming a puddle in the corner. I glanced around cautiously. Genya was standing in the doorway by the stairs. His head was jerking quickly in all directions, right, left, forward, and back. And at the same time, he was smiling, as if delighted by a good joke. I screamed, and my cry echoed, growing louder. The boy laughed. His head kept twitching and twitching, like an evil clown on a spring, suddenly popping out of a box. I quickly rushed toward the passage, knocked the guy off his feet, and ran up the stairs. "Careful, or you'll break your neck," he shouted from the dimness below. It turned out that the sufferer had gained my trust, pretended to be a friend, and lured me to the cemetery, making me go down into the crypt. Since then, they stuck to me like pesky flies, giving me no peace day or night. They deprived me of a normal life and turned my existence into a nightmare. I never dreamed of anything grand. I just wanted to live like everyone else. To study, to work, to have friends, a family, to be happy. All of that became impossible. The sufferers followed me everywhere. They ruined all my endeavors, set me up in front of my bosses, did nasty things to the girls I tried to get close to, and made me look like an idiot in front of my colleagues. Everything I tried to do turned into a circus and a nightmare. Over time, I gave up trying to reclaim a normal life and surrendered. I started making a living doing things that didn't require interacting with people. I put up flyers on the streets and stuffed advertisements into mailboxes. The work was boring, of course, but better than nothing. One day, I entered an apartment building with a stack of leaflets and saw a woman in a purple housecoat and slippers. Her light hair was pulled back with a claw clip, revealing slightly protruding ears with gold earrings. She was standing by her apartment door, pale and frightened. "Young man, don't you think it smells like gas?" she asked anxiously. "I don't think so," I replied after sniffing the air. She stepped closer, stood right in front of me, and looked into my eyes. "You don't smell it. I'm telling you, it smells like gauze." The woman's mouth stretched in a scream. Her face was gradually taking on the color of her robe. Her eyes widened, she started to tremble, and foam appeared on her lips. Her scream stirred up a wind. I dropped the flyers. They scattered across the landing and the steps. I was already running away from there, barely looking back. That woman stomped across the tile in her heavy-soled slippers and shouted, "Can't breathe. There's nothing to breathe." That's how sufferers always burst into my everyday life, vividly and unexpectedly. I didn't even want to leave the house. Only there, alone with myself, did I feel peace and safety. God forbid I ever lose my last refuge and end up out there among them, on the street. I wouldn't survive in that endless madness. Right now, my apartment is a place to escape from nightmares, a place where everything is good and serene, where I can gather the mental strength for another unpredictable day. I wanted to learn how to make money online so I would never have to leave my apartment. But it didn't go well, since I didn't have any of the necessary skills. So I had to go back to handing out flyers and posting ads again. My last miserable paycheck went to pay off my electricity debts. I knew that if I didn't pay now, they'd cut off my power. All I had left in my pocket was a couple hundred, just enough for a bag of rice and a can of food. That would let me get by for a couple more days. I often ate the cheapest food just to save money. And damn it, I couldn't even choke down the rice anymore. But I didn't really have a choice. On my way home, I noticed a small diner with a bright sign that said Grill Shawarma. I pulled 200 rubles out of my pocket and looked at them, realizing just how pathetic my life was. I had to make a choice, eat shawarma once and go hungry, or choke down grains for 2 more days. I guess not everyone has to make decisions like that. Not everyone can understand what true poverty is, when you don't know if you'll be able to buy soap this week or if you'll have to keep washing with just water, when you don't know if you'll have work or if you'll finally be able to buy a new pair of socks. These grim, hopeless thoughts made my mood even worse. I decided to give myself a little celebration. With my last bit of money, I wanted to feel at least a little happier. So I headed to a diner. Inside, 3 people were sitting at the tables. Behind the counter stood a girl in an apron, about 25 years old. I looked at her face suspiciously, just like I always do with strangers. She furrowed her brows in response, looking puzzled. "What do you want?" the diner worker asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "1 classic shawarma, please," I said, letting go of my paranoia. "To go or for here?" she clarified. I hesitated. Home was still a long way off, and my stomach was already rumbling dully. I was craving something hot and juicy. "For here." "And tea, please, with sugar," I finally replied, feeling a hopeful warmth fill my soul at the thought of a small pleasure. "That'll be 210, the girl replied, taking out a box of tea. "What if I skip the sugar?" I asked awkwardly, lowering my eyes. "I only have 200. "All right," the worker said with a click of her tongue. "Just give me your 200 already." While waiting for my order, I picked the farthest table and sat as far away from everyone as possible. I nervously tapped my foot, afraid someone would interrupt and not let me eat in peace. How exhausting it is to live a life in constant expectation of a catch. My intuition didn't let me down. A short, heavy-set man got up from the neighboring table and walked over to me. I looked up, hoping he would just ask if he could take some napkins and then leave. But no. The man stood there silently. His face suddenly turned red, as if scalded with boiling water. His skin blistered, then shriveled and began to peel off, exposing raw red flesh. I jumped up from the table, ready to run away. But suddenly, a diner employee appeared nearby. She shoved the suffering man in the side and said, "Hey, pig, get out of here." And to my surprise, he obeyed. He looked at the girl in confusion, lowered his head, and walked toward the exit, molten skin dripping onto his shoes. By that time, all the other customers had left. Only the diner employee and I remained. "Did you see what happened to him?" I asked in surprise. "Yeah, he boiled himself hard," the girl replied, setting a plastic plate of shawarma and a cup of tea on the table in front of me. I kept bombarding her with questions. "Does he come here often?" "Every day," she smirked. "And you're not afraid?" "What could he do to me?" the employee replied, wiping down the next table. "And do you see the others too?" I pressed on. "Of course I do." The girl answered as if it was something completely ordinary for her. I couldn't believe I'd met someone who also saw the sufferers and wasn't even afraid of them. Honestly, I'd never tried to find out how dangerous they really were, so I just always ran away. I had just opened my mouth to ask the next question, but the girl tapped her finger on her wrist. "Sorry, I have to work," she said, turning away and heading behind the counter. "Enjoy your meal." "Thank you." I hadn't felt this calm outside my home in a long time. I ate my shawarma, washed it down with sweet tea, glanced at the girl, and wondered how she managed to stay so lighthearted with that kind of curse. As I was leaving, she called after me, "Come by again sometime." "Yeah, thanks for the sugar and for everything," I replied as I walked out of the diner. After all, I'd always dreamed of meeting someone like myself. Someone who would understand my fears and pain. That's why, whenever I managed to scrape together an extra couple hundred, would rush straight to that little eatery. Yulia, that's what it said on the name tag pinned to her work apron. And this girl always greeted me with a friendly smile. Sometimes, that same fat guy would be sitting in the diner. He would glance at me, then at Yulia. His face would twitch with malice, and sometimes blisters would swell and burst on his cheeks and nose. But he no longer came over or bothered me. The next time I came in, I dug all the change out of my pockets and said, "A shawarma in cheese lavash." "And tea, without the tea." "All right, it'll be ready in a moment," the girl said, realizing I was short on money. I still couldn't bring myself to ask her personal questions about herself, about our fate. My shyness got in the way, but I really wanted to get to know her better. I hoped that maybe she could teach me how to live with this too. I sat at the table and watched the customers. That evening, there were 3 of them, including that big guy. A young guy couldn't take his eyes off his phone screen, and a swarthy man was hungrily devouring his belayash. No one paid any attention to the man at the next table, whose face was covered in swelling blisters. I decided not to look at him either, so I wouldn't lose my appetite. And when I finished the last bite and drank my tea, I went back to the girl behind the counter, hoping to get at least a little of her attention. "Do you know what happened here?" I asked. "What do you mean?" she replied, raising an eyebrow. "Well, those guys." I cautiously nodded in the direction of the big guy. "They only show up where something has happened." "Oh, you mean that," she said, pointing her finger at the ceiling. A hot water pipe burst, and the door got jammed from the heat. "So we all got boiled alive in the scalding water." My ears rang at those words, but I still hoped the girl had just misspoken. "Sorry, what did you say?" "All of us," the diner worker repeated loudly. And in that very second, the masks were dropped. Her skin turned red, swelled up, and peeled off. Wet clumps of hair fell from her head. The diner filled with screams. Everyone there started howling in unison. The fat man, the guy with the phone, and the dark-skinned man suddenly turned into red hunks of meat. Their skin was hanging off them in tatters. Thick steam was rising from the bodies. They flailed their arms, choking on their own screams. The girl I had liked so much turned out to be just like them. Panicking, I rushed to the door, slammed my shoulder into it so hard my joint ached, but I couldn't open it. I battered it with my knees, pounded it with my fists, and rammed it again with my shoulder. And all this time, the sufferers kept screaming without a break. And finally, the door opened. I burst out onto the street and ran, glancing back just once. Behind me were only the dark, dusty windows of the diner, and above them hung an almost faded sign, "Shawarma Grill." Those damn sufferers had messed with me once again, and they'd probably keep doing it for the rest of my